Orhan had built what many considered the strongest S-rank party in the land. He had poured everything into it, his time, his sacrifice, his identity. But none of that mattered when the people he trusted most decided he was no longer worth keeping around. The story begins with Orhan wandering alone through the depths of a dungeon, looking like a man who had lost his sense of purpose. His eyes were hollow, his steps heavy. Then a demon rat crossed his path. Almost on instinct, he reached for the sword at his side, a blade he hadn't drawn in what felt like a lifetime. He turned, locked eyes with the creature, and cut it down in a single clean strike. Clean, but not perfect. He could feel the rust in his movement, the stiffness of muscles that had been neglected for far too long. The sound of the kill, however, drew attention. More rats swarmed in from the shadows, rushing toward him with hungry aggression. But they had made the mistake of targeting the man who had once built the hero's party from the ground up. One after another, he put them down without breaking a sweat. As he stood over the scattered monster cores on the dungeon floor, something shifted inside him. Maybe he wasn't as far gone as he thought. Maybe there was still something left worth fighting for. But before he could even process that thought, a group of goblins emerged and surrounded him. These were a different threat entirely, far stronger than the rats, and Orhan knew it. He wasn't about to be careless. He reached inward and cast his own support magic on himself, something he had rarely ever thought to do before. The enchantment surged through him, sharpening his reflexes, hardening his body, and making his blade feel like an extension of his very will. The goblins charged. It didn't help them. He moved through them like a force of nature, fast, precise, and devastating. As the last of the first wave fell, something clicked in the back of his mind. He had spent so long using his magic to empower others that he had never stopped to realize how monstrous it felt when directed at himself. He barely had a second to process that revelation before the second wave hit. His enchantment was burning out fast, but he refused to slow down. He threw himself into the chaos head first, carving through goblin after goblin, even chasing one down at the end just to make sure it didn't escape. When the buff finally faded, he took stock of the situation and made a mental note. The spell held for roughly 3 minutes in active combat. That was his window. He would have to be surgical about when he used it. As if the dungeon was testing his patience, a third wave poured in immediately. He weathered the storm, holding his ground with raw skill alone until the right moment came. Then he triggered the enchantment one final time, riding that burst of power through the last of the goblins until the horde was completely wiped out. Standing in the silence that followed, staring at the lifeless body of the last goblin, his mind drifted back to the night that had broken him. He remembered it clearly. Oliver had walked into his study alongside Anne and Dirk, and without hesitation told him he was being removed from the party. Orhan had stood there in stunned disbelief, struggling to make sense of the words coming out of his best friend's mouth. He turned to Oliver and demanded an explanation. They were supposed to be brothers, friends from the same village, but Oliver had been cold and distant, as though he were reading from a script. He told Orhan plainly that friendship didn't change the fact that he was the weakest link on the team. Anne and Dirk didn't hold back either. They both agreed that Orhan had been doing nothing but slowing them down, holding the entire party back from reaching their true potential. Orhan felt his whole world collapse as the reality sank in. This was a party he had created, a party that had climbed through dungeon after dungeon and earned the name the Hero's Party through blood and sacrifice. And now they were throwing him out of it. Oliver explained his reasoning coldly. During their last joint dungeon run, he had observed the enchanters from other parties, how skilled and effective they were, and in comparison, Orhan had fallen painfully short. Orhan fired back immediately, reminding them that he was never an enchanter to begin with. He had only taken on the role because nobody else in the party had any aptitude for magic. He had abandoned his identity as a swordsman, trained from scratch in a field that didn't come naturally to him, and even developed his own unique style of support magic just to fill the gap. He had given up everything for these people. Ain laughed. She mocked him openly, calling him a man full of excuses, and pointed out that Oliver had always been the better swordsman anyway. Orhan's eyes moved to Oliver as a last desperate hope, but Oliver simply told him that they had already found a replacement enchanter, someone who would actually help them rise. There was nothing left to say. Orhan accepted it. He turned to leave, and as he did, Anne got in one final dig, telling him that someone with A-rank swordsmanship and A-rank magic had no business being in an S-rank party. A jack of all trades and master of none, she called him. Her words followed him out of that memory and back into the present, where he walked through the dungeon corridor with quiet, burning resolve. He thought about the new combat style he had been developing, one that blended the swordsman and the mage into something no one had ever seen before. If they wanted to call him a jack of all trades, fine. He would master every single one of them. And when the time came, Oliver and the others would understand exactly what they had thrown away. He was just about to leave the teleportation room when 4 adventurers came sprinting in, completely out of breath. Their leader was trying to reassure the group that they had made the right call pulling out when they did, since the number of orcs had been far beyond what they expected. One of the members, however, pointed out quietly that they had left a girl behind. The leader dismissed it without a second thought. She had just joined their party that day, and naturally he had prioritized the people he had known longer. Leaving her behind, in his mind, was simply practical. That logic hit Orhan like a blade to the chest. The wound of his own abandonment was still raw. He turned toward them and told them exactly what he thought of people like them. One of the men tried to get physical, reaching out to strike him. Orhan grabbed him effortlessly and put him on the floor without even raising his voice, then told the group to get out of his sight. He turned to their leader, demanded to know where they had left the girl, and ran. He found her at the far end of a cave, completely cornered. She had her back against the wall, tears streaming down her face, desperately holding up a defensive shield as a mob of orcs closed in around her. Her shield cracked, then shattered. The orcs moved in for the kill. Orhan arrived just in time. He unleashed a burst of wind magic that sent the orcs stumbling backward, buying just enough space. Then he drew his sword and charged in. The first orc swung hard at him, trying to bury him into the ground. He blocked it cleanly and countered with his reinforcement magic already active, slicing through the creature as though it were made of air. The girl watched from behind, bewildered. She couldn't tell if he was a swordsman or a mage, because somehow he was clearly both. He layered magic onto his blade mid-combat, sharpening it further before cutting through weapons and armored bodies alike. As he fought, he acknowledged to himself that those men hadn't been entirely wrong, that many orcs at once would have overwhelmed a normal group. But he also knew that he would rather fall in that cave than leave someone behind the way he had been left behind. That thought alone kept his blade moving. With one final sweeping assault, he cleared the cave. Every orc fell. Only cores and silence remained. He turned toward the redhead at the far end of the cave, but she had already collapsed from the adrenaline wearing off. By the time the two of them made it out of the dungeon and into the fading light of the evening, she had recovered enough to introduce herself. Her name was Sophia, and she insisted on taking him to dinner as a small thank you for saving her life. Orhan accepted. She led him to a tavern connected to the Silver Rabbits Guild, and from the crest on her cape, it became clear that she was a member. Something about her nagged at the back of his mind, a sense of familiarity he couldn't quite place. That confusion resolved itself quickly when Sophia introduced him to her older sister, Selma, who Orhan recognized immediately. Selma was the most powerful enchanter in the entire country and the architect of the modern party role system, the framework that divided adventurers into attackers, tanks, and support mages that nearly every party now followed. Selma's eyes landed on Orhan with immediate suspicion. The age gap between him and her 14-year-old sister made her reach for her phone. Orhan told her to relax and assured her his name wasn't anywhere it shouldn't be. Sophia jumped in and explained that Orhan had just saved her life down in the dungeon. That seemed to settle Selma down, at least enough to have a conversation, though she still took a moment to scold her sister for sneaking off to a dungeon alone without telling anyone. The three of them talked over dinner. Orhan told Selma that he had been cut from the hero's party and was essentially on his own now. He caught a flicker of interest in her eyes and could already guess where her mind was going. Before she could get there, he told her up front that he had no intention of joining any party for the foreseeable future. Selma told him not to flatter himself and asked if he was open to a job instead. She explained that her guild was running a large dungeon expedition the following day. It would be filled with new adventurers, and the senior members were responsible for making sure the floor bosses, which appeared every 10 levels, were handled and that no one got killed. The expedition had a sponsor behind it, and she wanted Orhan to come along as additional support. She also told him that she genuinely respected his abilities, and that was the only reason she was asking. Those words landed harder than she probably intended. The whole reason he had been kicked out in the first place was because his former party had seen Selma perform and decided they needed someone on her level. And here was Selma herself telling him she respected him. Orhan agreed, but on one condition. He would enter the dungeon as a swordsman only. He was done being a mage. Selma looked slightly uncertain about that, but decided that having him along was worth more than debating his role. She figured that when things got dangerous enough, he would naturally fall back on his magic anyway. After dinner, Orhan stopped by a familiar shop to pick up some new gear. The old man behind the counter lit up the moment he saw him, greeting him like family. He had been Orhan's go-to for armor and weapons since the very beginning, back when Orhan had no reputation, no party, and no name. That history made what Orhan had to say next all the harder. He told the old man honestly that he had been removed from the hero's party, which meant his endorsement wasn't worth much anymore. Nobody would care what sword he carried or where he bought his armor. He apologized for letting him down. The old man said nothing for a moment. Then he smiled. He thanked Orhan for everything he had done and told him simply that people would still listen to him because he was a good person, and good people with real strength always found their way back to the top. It was such a small thing to say, but it broke through something in Orhan that all the goblin hordes and orc mobs hadn't been able to touch. Someone still believed in him. That was enough. He made a quiet promise to himself right then and there. He would rebuild from the very bottom, and he would not stop until he had proven every single one of them wrong. The following morning, Orhan made his way to the Silver Rabbit clan's headquarters alongside Sophia. Their leader, a man named Vince, welcomed them warmly and wasted no time making Orhan feel at ease. When Orhan expressed that it was an honor to stand before the head of such a renowned clan, Vince simply smiled and told him to drop the formality. As far as he was concerned, the two of them were equals. He made it clear that he already knew about Orhan's contributions to the hero's party and understood the real weight of what he had brought to that team. Rather than exchanging pleasantries, Vince suggested they get straight to the point and focus on the matter that had actually brought them together, the teaching expedition. He turned to Selma and she laid out the plan. Over the course of 3 days, their group would descend through the dungeon from the very first floor all the way down to the 51st. The first day's target was floor 21, the second day would push them further to floor 36, and on the third and final day, they would aim to conquer floor 51 entirely. As Selma spoke, her mind briefly drifted back to the conversation she had shared with Vince the evening before, the moment she had told him that Orhan had been cut from the hero's party. Vince's reaction had been immediate. He called it the biggest mistake the hero's party had ever made, reasoning that without Orhan holding everything together, their performance would drop dramatically. Selma had agreed completely. She knew better than most what Orhan's support magic had meant for that party. On paper, his raw power didn't match the very top S-rank support mages, but what he lacked in raw strength, he more than compensated for with his casting speed, which ran at least 4 times faster than even her own. She also remembered watching him fight firsthand. He had been weaving his own original spells into combat seamlessly, all while reading the battlefield with a level of clarity and precision that she had rarely seen in anyone. Without him, the hero's party would struggle to hold on to their position at the top, and that opened a window for the Silver Rabbits to move in and claim that title for themselves. Vince had found one thing difficult to understand, though. Why would someone as gifted as Orhan agree to a joint dungeon expedition where he stood to gain very little? Selma had answered that honestly. Support mages, no matter how skilled, rarely received the recognition they deserved. She herself was famous, but only because her magic was flashy enough to catch people's attention. The truly powerful ones worked in silence, propping others up while remaining invisible in the eyes of the crowd. Her thoughts returned to the present when Orhan's voice cut through the room. He asked Selma to confirm the structure of the expedition. 10 parties of rookies entering the dungeon, with 5 escorts overseeing them, including Selma and himself. The rookies would handle the monsters in rotation, and the escorts would step in only if something beyond their capability appeared. That part made sense. What didn't was the number of escorts. If the goal was to keep the rookies safe, why bring only 5 S-rankers instead of multiple A-rank parties spread across the group? Selma explained that having too much coverage would remove the pressure entirely, and the whole point was for the rookies to genuinely feel the weight of dungeon exploration, not to be shielded from it so completely that they came out overestimating themselves. Orhan didn't fully believe her reasoning. He suspected there was something the Silver Rabbits weren't telling him, but he let it go. he accepted. Vince looked pleased. He told Orhan that he would receive 2 gold pieces up front, with 10 more upon completion. Orhan paused at that. He asked if that wasn't excessive, but Selma told him plainly that they valued what he brought to the table, and they wanted to make sure he was paid accordingly. Orhan thanked them, confirmed he would be at the dungeon entrance the next morning, and hoped for the best. Morning came quickly. Orhan arrived at the dungeon entrance to find a crowd of new adventurers already gathered, buzzing with nervous energy. He spotted Sophia and Selma among them, and offered Selma a compliment on her outfit. Sophia immediately bristled, reminding him, again, that her sister was a minor. Orhan told her to calm down, assuring her that Michael Jackson wasn't exactly his role model either. Sophia then asked where he was staying, now that he no longer had the party's mansion. He told her he was at an inn for the time being, but that he'd find something more permanent soon enough. With everyone present and accounted for, Orhan noted that the group seemed to be fully assembled. Selma agreed and directed Sophia to join her party before walking Orhan over to meet the other 3 escorts. She introduced him as someone she personally trusted and considered extremely capable. The 3 received him without hesitation. A blue-haired man named Ant identified himself as a tank. A blonde man named Byrne introduced himself as a second tank. And the last of the 3, a short-haired woman named Kathy, turned out to be the group's healer. Orhan took stock of the lineup, with himself as the frontline attacker and Selma as the enchanter. The 5 of them together formed a remarkably well-balanced escort unit. Still, one thought nagged at him. What exactly had their plan been if he had said no? Something about this whole arrangement felt off, but he filed that thought away and moved on. Selma gathered all the rookies together and introduced Orhan to the group. She told them plainly that they had secured one of the strongest adventurers in the country to accompany them on this journey and that there was nothing to be afraid of. She mentioned that Orhan had reached the 94th floor, a depth that even she herself had not achieved, and that he had been a core member of the heroes' party itself. The rookies immediately lit up, their nerves visibly settled, replaced with a renewed sense of confidence. Orhan, on the other hand, felt the weight of that introduction land squarely on his shoulders. A lot of people were now counting on him, and he felt every bit of it. With the parties distributed and the escorts briefed, Selma told Orhan that he would be leading the 10th party, the most promising group in the entire expedition. She believed that with the right guidance they had the potential to handle even mid-level dungeons without breaking a sweat. That assignment made Orhan's eyes narrow slightly. Giving the most talented party to an outsider with no clan affiliation made very little sense. Once again, something didn't add up, but he walked over to his assigned group and introduced himself. Sophia was there, which wasn't surprising. What was surprising was that the group only had 3 members total. A blonde boy named Logan clarified that it had always been just the 3 of them, because no one else could keep up. He introduced himself as the party's enchanter, boldly claiming that he intended to surpass Selma herself one day. Orhan recognized the attitude immediately. Raw confidence without the experience to temper it, the kind that had a habit of getting people killed in dungeons. He kept the thought to himself and moved on to the next member. The second was a girl named Carol, who introduced herself as the party's tank. Orhan noticed immediately that she wasn't wearing any armor. He asked if she planned to equip it inside the dungeon. Carol replied that she didn't use armor or shields at all. She relied entirely on speed and evasion to protect the group. Dodge-type tanks were rare for a reason. That style demanded an exceptional level of combat experience and battlefield awareness that simply couldn't be faked. Looking at Carol now, Orhan could see she didn't have it yet. He asked if the clan had warned her about the risks. Logan answered for her, confirming that the clan had repeatedly advised Carol to operate as a conventional tank until she had more experience under her belt. She had ignored every single one of those warnings. Orhan began to understand why this group had been assigned to him. The Star Party was also the problem party, the one the other escorts hadn't wanted to deal with. Regardless, the expedition launched without further delay, and all the parties descended into the dungeon together. Carol proved immediately that she had no concept of silence, peppering Orhan with questions about why he had left the heroes' party from the moment they stepped inside. He couldn't find a way to make her stop. To manage the burden on the group, he quietly set up magical traps along their trail as they moved, allowing the traps to deal with smaller monsters automatically so the party wouldn't waste energy on unnecessary fights. By the time they reached the 20th floor, Orhan had formed a clear picture of each of his 3 charges. Logan, beneath all the bravado, was genuinely talented. His enchanting skills were sharp enough that he could realistically perform at an A-rank level if he kept developing, but he lacked the ability to direct the party effectively, which for an enchanter was a serious flaw. Carol was blindingly fast, which was exactly what a dodge-type tank needed, but her instinct was to charge straight at monsters the moment she spotted them, when her actual job was to stand between the enemy and her party, and her weapons, 2 small daggers, fit her fighting style but raised questions about whether she had enough destructive force for the floors ahead. Sophia, by comparison, had the least raw talent of the 3, but she also had no major weaknesses, made sound decisions, and could be relied on. In a group like this, that steadiness was worth a great deal. At the end of the day's run, the escorts handled the floor 20 boss and the expedition cleared its first milestone. ID cards were registered as proof of completion. Everyone filtered out of the dungeon for the night, and Orhan headed back to rest, already thinking about what the next 2 days would bring. The next morning, however, hit him like a cold bucket of water. He woke to find a newspaper waiting for him, and on its front page was his own face staring back at him. The hero's party had made an official public announcement. Orhan had been removed from the team, and a new enchanter had already been brought in to replace him. He had known this was coming. He had accepted it internally, but seeing it printed for the entire country to read made it sting in a way he hadn't quite prepared himself for. There was nothing to be done about it. He folded the paper, pulled himself together, and headed out toward the dungeon, quietly wondering whether the rookies would look at him differently after reading the morning's headline. He didn't make it far before someone stepped into his path. A blue-haired girl stood before him, Luna, the hero's party's healer. Even during the ugliest days at the end of his time with the group, when Oliver and the others had gone cold and distant, Luna had always been the exception. She had kept smiling, kept showing up, kept treating him like he belonged. On the day he had actually been forced out, she hadn't been there. She had been running an errand, and Orhan had always quietly suspected that if she had been present, things might not have gone so smoothly for the ones pushing him out. Luna reached for his hands and held them tightly. She begged him to come back. She told him she would find a way to make the others understand what they had thrown away, that the party needed him, whether they knew it or not. She brought up the promise they had once made together, the 3 of them, the promise to clear the great dungeon side by side. That was the wrong thing to say. The mention of that promise didn't soften Orhan, it lit something darker in him. He pulled his hands back and told her plainly that the promise had been made by 3 people, including Oliver, and Oliver was the one who had looked him in the eye and thrown him out. That promise was dead the moment Oliver broke it. With a heart that still hadn't fully healed from everything, Orhan turned away from Luna and told her simply and finally that he was never going back. Then he walked toward the dungeon entrance and didn't look behind him.